Welcome. Get comfortable. Let your body sink into wherever you're resting. Tonight, we're going to explore something fascinating about the human mind, something that might change the way you think about learning forever. And as we move through these ideas, feel free to let your eyes grow heavy, to let your breathing slow, and to drift away whenever you're ready. Most people believe that learning quickly is a gift, something you're either born with or you're not. But what if I told you that's not quite true? What if the reason most people learn slowly has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with the system they're using? Let's begin with our first insight. Learn how to learn first. You see, before you dive into mastering a new language or playing an instrument or developing any skill at all, there's something more fundamental you need to understand. Learning itself is a skill. And like any skill, it can be developed, refined, and optimized. Most people skip this step entirely. They jump straight into trying to learn Spanish or play guitar without ever asking themselves, how does learning actually work? What are the mechanisms? What are the strategies? When you take time to understand the learning process itself, when you study how memory forms, how skills develop, how the brain creates new pathways, you gain a tremendous advantage. It's like having a map before starting a journey. You're not wandering anymore. You're navigating with purpose and direction. And this brings us to something equally important. You can learn skills faster by structuring practice, not adding hours. There's a common misconception that speed of learning is simply a matter of time invested. More hours equals faster results, right? Not quite. Research shows that the structure of your practice matters far more than the raw number of hours you put in. You could spend 10 hours passively watching videos about a subject and retain very little. Or you could spend 3 hours engaged in deliberate, focused practice, testing yourself, making mistakes, correcting them, and learn significantly more. The difference isn't the time. It's the quality and structure of that time. When you organize your practice sessions with intention, when you break things into manageable chunks, focus on specific weaknesses, and actively engage with the material, learning accelerates dramatically. It's not about doing more. It's about doing it right. Now here's something that might surprise you. Trying to learn many things at once slows you down. In our modern world, we're often told we should be polymaths, learning 5 languages, 3 instruments, mastering coding and painting and cooking all at the same time. But cognitive science tells us something different. When you divide your attention across multiple complex skills simultaneously, you create what's called cognitive interference. Each skill competes for the same mental resources. Your brain struggles to form strong neural pathways because it's constantly being pulled in different directions. Think of it like trying to dig 5 shallow holes instead of 1 deep well. You expend the same energy, but you never reach water. The scattered approach feels productive in the moment, but it actually undermines the consolidation process your brain needs to move information from short-term awareness into long-term mastery. So what's the alternative? Focus on one skill. This might feel counterintuitive, especially if you have many interests. But here's what happens when you commit to learning one thing at a time. Your brain can dedicate its full capacity to building the neural architecture for that specific skill. There's no competition for resources. Every practice session reinforces the same pathways, making them stronger and more automatic. You enter what researchers call deep practice, where your mind isn't distracted by other goals or divided commitments. And interestingly, when you do eventually move to learning a second skill, you'll often find you learn it faster than the first. Why? Because you've strengthened your general learning capabilities. You've taught your brain how to build mastery. The focused approach isn't limiting. It's actually the fastest path to becoming a versatile learner. One skill at a time, built deeply. And when you choose to focus on that one skill, here's what makes the difference. Commit to at least 20 focused hours. There's fascinating research on this specific number. 20 hours of deliberate practice is enough to take you from complete beginner to reasonably competent in almost any skill. That might not sound like much, just 20 hours, but there's a key word there. Focused. These aren't 20 hours of casual dabbling or distracted half-efforts. These are 20 hours where you're fully present, actively engaged, making mistakes and correcting them, pushing yourself just beyond your comfort zone. What happens during these 20 hours is remarkable. In the first few hours, you're clumsy, uncertain, making constant errors. But somewhere around hour 5 or 6, patterns start to emerge. By hour 10, things that seemed impossible at the start are becoming natural. By hour 20, you've built a foundation of competence that would have seemed miraculous when you began. 20 focused hours. Not 20 weeks of occasional practice. Not 20 hours spread across a year. 20 hours of concentrated, deliberate effort. That's the commitment that transforms beginners into capable practitioners. But those 20 hours need to be spent wisely. Start with the highest impact, 20%. This principle comes from something called the Pareto principle, which observes that roughly 80% of results come from 20% of efforts. In learning, this means that a small subset of techniques, concepts, or skills will give you the vast majority of practical ability. Before you dive into practicing everything, step back and ask yourself, what are the fundamental building blocks? What are the core techniques that show up everywhere? If you're learning a language, it's not memorizing 10,000 words. It's the 300 most common words that appear in 80% of conversations. If you're learning to cook, it's not mastering 100 recipes. It's understanding 5 fundamental techniques that underpin most dishes. When you identify and focus on this critical 20% first, you build competence rapidly. You're not wasting time on obscure edge cases or advanced techniques you won't use for months. You're building the foundation that matters most. And that foundation accelerates everything that comes after. Of course, to identify that 20%, you need clarity. Set clear learning goals. Vague aspirations like, I want to get better at this, or I'd like to learn that someday, don't direct your brain effectively. Your mind needs specificity. Instead of, I want to learn guitar, try, I want to play 3 songs smoothly from start to finish. Instead of, I want to improve my Spanish, try, I want to hold a 10-minute conversation about my daily life. Notice the difference. Clear goals give your practice sessions direction. They help you measure progress. They prevent you from wandering aimlessly through practice, unsure if you're actually improving. And they create small victories along the way, moments where you can say, yes, I've achieved this specific thing. Those small victories release dopamine, which strengthens motivation and makes the learning process feel rewarding rather than endless. Clarity isn't just helpful, it's essential for rapid learning. But here's where many learners go wrong. They set clear goals, but then practice in ways that don't match those goals. Match practice to real life. If your goal is to have conversations in a foreign language, you can't spend all your time doing grammar worksheets. If you want to play music with others, you can't only practice scales in isolation. Your practice needs to mirror the actual context where you'll use the skill. This is called transfer-appropriate processing. The closer your practice environment matches the real-world application, the more automatically your skills will transfer when you need them. It's why athletes practice under game-like conditions. It's why pilots train in simulators that recreate real flight scenarios. Your brain encodes not just the skill itself, but also the context around it. When you practice in realistic conditions, you're building connections that activate naturally when those conditions appear in real life. Don't just practice the skill in abstract isolation. Practice it the way you'll actually use it. And that leads naturally to another powerful principle. Jump quickly into real tasks. Many learners spend months or even years in what they consider preparation. They tell themselves they're not ready yet. They need to study more theory, memorize more vocabulary, practice more fundamentals before they try the real thing. But this extended preparation period often becomes procrastination in disguise. Research shows that engaging with authentic tasks early, even when you feel unprepared, accelerates learning dramatically. Yes, you'll make mistakes. Yes, it will feel uncomfortable. But that discomfort is where learning happens. When you attempt a real conversation in your target language, after just a few weeks of study, you immediately discover what you actually need to know. When you try to build a real project with your new coding skills, you encounter the practical challenges that textbooks never mention. Real tasks create urgency, focus your attention, and reveal gaps in your knowledge that you can then fill strategically. Don't wait until you feel ready. Jump in sooner than feels comfortable. And finally, embrace this truth. Learn by doing, not just consuming. In our information-rich world, it's easy to fall into the trap of passive consumption. Watching tutorials, reading books, listening to podcasts, all of this feels like learning. And to some degree, it is. but it's the weakest form of learning. Information that enters your mind passively creates shallow, fragile memories. Information that you actively work with, that you practice, apply, struggle with, and eventually master, creates deep, durable understanding. The ratio matters enormously. A good rule of thumb: for every hour you spend consuming information, you should spend at least 2 hours applying it. Making things, solving problems, creating with your new knowledge. This is where neural pathways strengthen. This is where skills become automatic. Consumption gives you the map, but doing is the actual journey. And it's the journey that changes you. So let these ideas settle into your mind as you drift. You don't need extraordinary talent. You don't need endless time. You need a better system. Focus on one skill at a time. Commit to 20 focused hours. Find the 20% that matters most. Set clear goals that match real-world use. And jump into doing rather than endlessly preparing. This is how learning becomes rapid, efficient, and deeply satisfying. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts grow quiet. And let sleep come gently, whenever you're ready. As you continue to relax, letting your body grow heavier with each breath, we're going to explore something remarkable. We're going to look at how experts approach learning differently from everyone else. And the secret might surprise you. It's not that experts learn faster because they're smarter. It's that they've learned how to simplify complexity. They've learned how to break down what seems overwhelming into pieces that are manageable, clear, and surprisingly easy to master. Let's begin with the foundation of all intelligent learning. Break the skill into parts. When you look at any complex skill from the outside, it can feel impossibly large. Playing piano seems like one enormous challenge. Speaking a foreign language seems like a mountain you could never climb. But here's what experts understand. No skill is actually singular. Every skill is a collection of smaller sub-skills bundled together. And when you take the time to unbundle them, to separate them into distinct components, something magical happens. The overwhelming becomes approachable. A pianist doesn't learn to play piano all at once. They learn hand position, then rhythm, then reading notes, then coordination between hands, then dynamics, then phrasing. Each piece individually is learnable. And when you master the pieces one by one, they eventually integrate into fluid performance. The mistake most beginners make is trying to learn everything simultaneously. They see the finished product and try to replicate it whole. But experts know better. They deconstruct first. They identify the individual components, and then they master each component systematically. This is how complexity becomes simple. But not all parts are created equal. Identify power subskills first. Within any complex skill, there are certain foundational elements that support everything else. These are what we might call power subskills. They're the techniques or concepts that show up everywhere, that unlock multiple other abilities once you master them. Think of them as the load-bearing walls of a building. If you strengthen these first, everything else becomes easier. In writing, understanding sentence structure is a power subskill. It appears in every paragraph you'll ever write. In mathematics, understanding variables and equations is a power subskill that unlocks algebra, calculus, and beyond. The challenge is identifying which subskills are truly foundational versus which are peripheral. A good question to ask yourself is this: if I master this one thing, how many other things become easier? The higher that number, the more likely you found a power subskill. Experts develop an intuition for this. They can look at a skill domain and quickly identify the core techniques that will give them the most leverage. And by focusing on these first, they build competence much faster than someone who treats all subskills as equally important. Now here's a technique that seems counterintuitive, but works remarkably well. Use constraints to force fundamentals. When you're learning something new, it's tempting to have access to all the tools, all the options, all the possibilities right from the start. But this abundance can actually slow your learning. When you have too many choices, you never develop deep mastery of the basics because you're constantly jumping to the next shiny technique. Experts do something different. They deliberately limit themselves. A guitar player might practice using only 2 strings to force themselves to explore melody rather than relying on familiar chord shapes. A writer might limit themselves to simple sentences to master clarity before attempting complex structures. A chef might cook with only 5 ingredients to truly understand how each one behaves. These constraints feel restrictive at first, but they have a powerful effect. They force you to squeeze every bit of possibility out of the fundamentals. You can't hide behind complexity or variety. You have to become genuinely skilled with the basics. And once you've mastered the fundamentals under constraint, removing those constraints feels like being released into a world of infinite possibility. But now you have the foundation to actually use that possibility well. As you learn and practice, information accumulates. But raw information isn't useful until it's processed. Compress what you learn. Think of compression like this. When you first encounter a new concept, it takes up a lot of mental space. It's sprawling, unfamiliar, requiring conscious attention to recall and use. But through practice and understanding, that concept can be compressed. What once required a paragraph of explanation becomes a single word. What once took conscious thought becomes automatic. Experts are masters of compression. They've taken vast domains of knowledge and compressed them into efficient mental models. A chess grandmaster doesn't see 32 individual pieces on a board. They see patterns, threats, opportunities. All that complexity has been compressed into recognizable configurations. You can accelerate this compression process deliberately. After learning something new, force yourself to explain it in progressively shorter forms. First, explain it in a full paragraph, then in 3 sentences, then in 1 sentence, then in a single phrase. Each time you compress, you're identifying what's truly essential. You're discarding the scaffolding and keeping the structure. And compressed knowledge is accessible knowledge. It's there when you need it, without effort, without searching through mental filing cabinets. It's become part of how you think. Our brains are remarkably visual. Use visual maps and diagrams. Even when you're learning abstract or verbal information, translating it into visual form strengthens understanding and memory. This isn't just about drawing pictures. It's about creating spatial representations of relationships and structures. Mind maps that show how concepts connect to each other. Flowcharts that illustrate processes and decision points. Diagrams that reveal hierarchies and dependencies. When you engage the visual processing centers of your brain alongside the verbal centers, you create redundant pathways to the same information. You're encoding it twice in 2 different formats. And something interesting happens when you're forced to draw what you're learning. You immediately discover gaps in your understanding. You thought you understood how something worked until you tried to diagram it and realized you couldn't. That realization is valuable. It shows you exactly where to focus your attention next. Visual representations also make it easier to see the big picture. When everything exists as words and descriptions, it's hard to perceive overall structure. But a good diagram lets you hold an entire system in your mind at once. You can see patterns. You can see what connects to what. And that holistic view accelerates learning tremendously. But here's something even more powerful. Connect new ideas to old ones. Your brain doesn't store information in isolation. It stores information as a network, with each piece connected to many others. And the more connections a piece of information has, the easier it is to retrieve and use. When you're learning something new, the single most effective thing you can do is deliberately link it to knowledge you already possess. Ask yourself, what does this remind me of? How is this similar to something I already understand? How is it different? These questions aren't just intellectually interesting. They're creating neural bridges. You're taking advantage of existing strong pathways to support the new, weaker ones you're building. This is why analogies and metaphors are so powerful for learning. They leverage what you already know to illuminate what you don't. And the connections don't have to be obvious or conventional. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected connections. The key is to make those connections explicit and deliberate rather than hoping they'll form on their own. Every time you say, "This is like that thing I already know," you're making learning easier and faster. And because your understanding deepens over time, you need to do something regularly. Regularly reorganize your knowledge. The way you understand something when you first learn it is different from how you'll understand it after weeks or months of practice. Early on, your mental model is simple, perhaps even a bit inaccurate. But that's fine. It's a starting point. As you gain experience, you notice nuances you couldn't see before. You recognize connections you didn't know existed. Your understanding becomes richer and more sophisticated. But this doesn't happen automatically. It requires you to periodically step back and consciously restructure how you think about the domain. Go back to your notes, your diagrams, your summaries. Look at them with fresh eyes. How would you organize this information now, knowing what you know? Often, you'll find that what you thought was central is actually peripheral. What you thought was separate is actually connected. This reorganization isn't just tidying up. It's deepening your mastery. You're building a more accurate, more useful mental model. And the better your mental model, the more effectively you can operate within that skill domain. Think of it as regularly upgrading the operating system of your mind. Now let's talk about something that happens entirely inside your head, but is remarkably effective. Use mental simulation. This is the practice of running through a skill or task mentally, without physically performing it. You visualize yourself going through the motions, encountering the challenges, making the adjustments. And neuroscience has shown something fascinating. When you mentally simulate performing a skill, many of the same neural pathways activate as when you actually perform it physically. Your brain is essentially practicing without your body moving. Athletes use this extensively. A gymnast might visualize their routine hundreds of times, feeling each movement, each transition, each landing. A surgeon might mentally rehearse a complex procedure before entering the operating room. But this technique isn't limited to physical skills. You can mentally simulate a difficult conversation, running through different ways it might unfold. You can mentally simulate solving a type of math problem, working through the logic without pen and paper. Mental simulation lets you practice anywhere, anytime, and it's particularly valuable for preparing for high-pressure situations. When you've simulated something mentally many times, actually doing it feels familiar rather than novel. Your brain recognizes the pattern and knows what to do. There's a related technique that's equally powerful. Use mental rehearsal. While mental simulation focuses on practicing the skill itself, mental rehearsal is about preparing your mind for the learning session before it begins. Before you sit down to practice, spend a few moments mentally reviewing what you learned in the last session. What did you struggle with? What breakthrough did you have? What are you going to focus on today? This primes your brain. It activates the relevant neural networks, so they're ready to engage when you start practicing. It's like warming up before exercise. You're not just jumping cold into intensive work. You're preparing your mind to operate at its best. Mental rehearsal also helps with something called retrieval practice. By actively recalling what you learned previously, without looking at notes or references, you're strengthening those memories. And when you then begin your practice session, you're building on a strong foundation rather than trying to remember where you left off. It takes just a few minutes, but those few minutes dramatically improve the quality of the practice that follows. And here's a final technique that might feel awkward at first, but is remarkably effective. Learn out loud. When you're studying or practicing something, talk yourself through it. Verbalize what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're noticing. Explain concepts to yourself as if you were teaching someone else. This technique works for several reasons. First, it forces you to make your thinking explicit. When thoughts stay internal, they can be vague and fuzzy. But when you have to put them into words, you have to clarify them. Second, it engages multiple processing systems simultaneously. You're not just thinking, you're speaking and hearing. More neural pathways, stronger learning. Third, it slows you down just enough to be more deliberate. When you're working silently, it's easy to rush through, to skip steps, to not fully process what you're doing. But when you're explaining out loud, you move at the pace of speech, which is often the pace of genuine understanding. And finally, talking out loud makes it easier to catch errors. When you hear yourself say something incorrect, you often recognize it immediately in a way you might not if the thought just passed through your mind silently. You become both student and teacher. And teaching, even teaching yourself, is one of the most powerful forms of learning. So let these principles settle into your mind as your breathing deepens and your body relaxes. Learning isn't about forcing vast amounts of information into your head through sheer willpower. It's about working smarter. Break complexity into parts. Find the power subskills that unlock everything else. Use constraints to master fundamentals. Compress knowledge. Visualize it. Connect it to what you already know. Reorganize it as you grow. Simulate it mentally. Rehearse before practice. And learn out loud. This is how experts simplify complexity. This is how they make the impossible look effortless. Let your mind drift now. Let these ideas become part of your thinking. And let sleep come gently whenever it's ready. As you sink deeper into relaxation, your mind open and receptive, we're going to explore something truly fascinating. We're going to look at what actually happens inside your brain when you practice. Not what you think happens, not what feels like it should happen, but what neuroscience has revealed about how practice literally rewires your neural pathways. And understanding this changes everything. Because when you know how the brain actually learns, you can work with it instead of against it. You can make every practice session dramatically more effective. Let's start with perhaps the most important principle of all. Practice at the edge of your ability. Your brain doesn't grow when you're comfortable. It doesn't create new neural pathways when you're operating well within your current capabilities. Growth happens at the edge, right at that boundary between what you can do and what you can't quite do yet. This is where your brain recognizes a challenge and responds by building new connections. Neuroscientists call this the zone of proximal development. It's the sweet spot where tasks are difficult enough to require effort and attention, but not so difficult that they're completely beyond reach. Think of it like lifting weights. If the weight is too light, you're not stimulating muscle growth. If it's too heavy, you can't lift it at all and you risk injury. But right in that middle zone, where you can lift it, but it's genuinely challenging, that's where adaptation happens. Your brain works the same way. When you practice something that's just barely beyond your current ability, your brain releases neurochemicals that strengthen synaptic connections. You're literally building the neural architecture that will make tomorrow's impossibility today's ease. So don't practice what you already do well. That's maintenance, not growth. Practice at the edge, where discomfort and progress live. And at that edge, something important needs to happen. Train where mistakes are frequent, but fixable. This might sound counterintuitive. Aren't mistakes bad? Shouldn't you practice until you get things right? Actually, no. Research shows that the optimal learning zone is where you're making errors about 15 to 25% of the time. Not zero errors. Not constant failure. But a healthy dose of mistakes mixed with success. Here's why this matters. When you make a mistake and then correct it, your brain pays intense attention. It notices the discrepancy between what you intended and what happened. It adjusts. It strengthens the correct pathway and weakens the incorrect one. This is called error-driven learning, and it's one of the most powerful mechanisms for building skill. But the mistakes have to be fixable. If you're failing 90% of the time, you're not learning, you're just flailing. The errors need to be small enough that you can recognize them, understand them, and adjust. So aim for that zone where you're succeeding most of the time, but still making enough mistakes to keep your brain actively adapting. That's where the magic happens. Now let's talk about the structure of your practice sessions. Use short, frequent sessions. Your brain has limits on how long it can maintain peak focus and learning efficiency. For most people, that window is somewhere between 25 and 45 minutes before mental fatigue begins to set in. After that point, you're not learning as effectively. You're pushing through with diminishing returns. But here's the powerful part. If you practice for 30 minutes, take a break, and then practice for another 30 minutes later in the day, you'll learn more than if you practice for 60 straight minutes. Why? Because the breaks allow your brain to consolidate what you've learned. During rest periods, your brain is actually replaying and strengthening the neural patterns you just practiced. It's doing background processing. Additionally, multiple sessions across a day or week create multiple memory consolidation opportunities. You're giving your brain several chances to encode and strengthen the information instead of one long, exhausting push. Think of it like watering a plant. A little water regularly is better than drowning it once and leaving it dry the rest of the week. Short, frequent sessions work with your brain's natural learning rhythms instead of fighting against them. And the timing between those sessions matters enormously. Apply spaced repetition. Here's a fundamental truth about memory. Every time you successfully recall a piece of information after a delay, you strengthen that memory more than if you had reviewed it immediately. This is the spacing effect, and it's one of the most robust findings in all of learning science. When you first learn something, you should review it relatively soon, maybe the next day. But then you can wait longer before the next review. Maybe 3 days, then a week, then 2 weeks. Each successful retrieval after increasing intervals makes the memory stronger and more permanent. What's happening neurologically is fascinating. When you allow some time to pass, the memory becomes slightly harder to access. It takes effort to retrieve it, and that effort, that slight struggle to remember, is what triggers your brain to strengthen the pathway. It's like the memory is saying, this person keeps needing this information, so I'd better make it more accessible. Cramming everything in one session feels productive in the moment, but it creates weak, short-lived memories. Spacing your practice feels harder because you're forcing yourself to remember things that aren't fresh in your mind. But that difficulty is exactly what makes it effective. In fact, there's something paradoxical here that's worth understanding. Allow partial forgetting and relearning. This feels wrong. It feels like forgetting means you've wasted your time, that you're going backward. But actually, partial forgetting is a feature, not a bug. When you let yourself forget something slightly and then relearn it, the relearning is faster than the initial learning, and the resulting memory is stronger. Neuroscientists call this the retrieval effort effect. The harder your brain has to work to retrieve information, the more it strengthens that retrieval pathway. So if you practice something, then wait long enough that it starts to feel fuzzy, and then practice it again, you're creating a much more durable memory than if you had kept it fresh through constant review. This is why cramming for a test might get you through the exam, but leaves you with nothing a month later. You never allowed forgetting and relearning to happen. You kept everything artificially fresh. But fresh memories are fragile. Memories that have been partially forgotten and retrieved multiple times, those are robust. Those last. So how should you engage with material during practice? Use active recall instead of rereading. When you reread notes or watch a video again, it feels like learning. Information is flowing into your brain. But this passive review creates an illusion of competence. You recognize the material, and recognition feels like knowing. But recognition is much weaker than recall. The real test of learning is whether you can retrieve information without the prompt in front of you. Close your notes. Put away the reference material. And try to explain the concept from memory. Try to solve the problem without looking at the solution. Try to perform the skill without watching the demonstration. This is active recall, and it's dramatically more effective than passive review. It's also more uncomfortable. It requires mental effort. You'll stumble. You'll struggle. You might draw a blank. But that struggle is building retrieval pathways. Every time you successfully pull information from memory, you're strengthening your ability to do it again. And every time you fail to recall something, you're identifying exactly what needs more work. Active recall gives you honest feedback. Passive rereading lets you fool yourself into thinking you know more than you do. Here's another technique that feels counterintuitive, but is remarkably effective. Use interleaving instead of blocks. Most people practice in blocks. They do 20 minutes of one exercise, then 20 minutes of another. They study one topic completely before moving to the next. This feels organized and efficient. But research shows that mixing up your practice, interleaving different skills or topics within the same session, leads to better long-term learning. Why? Because interleaving forces your brain to constantly retrieve the appropriate approach for each problem. You can't just get into a groove and repeat the same pattern. You have to think about what's being asked and select the right tool or technique. This strengthens discrimination and decision-making. You're not just learning how to execute each skill. You're learning when to use each skill. Musicians who interleave different pieces instead of practicing one piece to completion before starting another show better long-term retention. Students who mix up different types of math problems instead of doing all the similar ones together perform better on tests. Yes, interleaving feels harder during practice. Your performance will be messy, but that difficulty is productive difficulty. It's creating the kind of flexible, adaptable knowledge that transfers to real situations. And while you're interleaving, there's another dimension to consider. Slightly vary your practice. Don't practice the same thing in exactly the same way every time. Introduce small variations in context, timing, location, or conditions. If you're practicing a language, don't always use the same phrases in the same order. If you're practicing a physical skill, change your position or the equipment slightly. If you're solving problems, vary the presentation or the details. This technique, called variable practice, prevents your learning from becoming too context-dependent. When you practice something identically every time, you're not just learning the skill itself. You're learning the skill in that specific context. And when the context changes, your performance can fall apart. But when you introduce variation, you're forcing your brain to extract the underlying principle that remains constant across all the variations. You're building adaptable competence rather than rigid habit. And when you eventually face a real-world situation that doesn't match your practice exactly, which is almost always the case, you'll be able to adapt because your practice prepared you for variation rather than perfect repetition. Now, mistakes are going to happen during all this practice. That's expected. But here's how to handle them intelligently. Use error logs instead of frustration. When you make a mistake, the typical response is emotional. You feel frustrated, disappointed, maybe even angry at yourself. And then you move on, hoping it won't happen again. But experts do something different. They maintain error logs. They record what went wrong, when it went wrong, and what they think caused it. This transforms mistakes from frustrating failures into valuable data. You begin to see patterns. You realize you always make a certain type of error when you're tired, or that you consistently forget a particular concept, or that you struggle with a specific technique under certain conditions. These insights are gold. They tell you exactly where to focus your practice. Instead of vague, "I need to get better," you have specific, actionable information. "I need to practice this technique specifically when I'm mentally fatigued because that's when it falls apart." Error logs also remove the emotional sting from mistakes. It's no longer personal failure. It's data collection. You're a scientist observing your own learning process. And that shift in perspective makes practice feel less threatening and more interesting. You're curious about your errors instead of ashamed of them. And speaking of feedback, timing matters tremendously. Front-load feedback early. When you're first learning a skill, immediate and frequent feedback is essential. You need to know right away if you're doing something correctly or incorrectly, so you can adjust before incorrect patterns become ingrained. Early in learning, your brain is forming new pathways, and those pathways are plastic. They can be shaped easily, but they also can solidify quickly. If you practice something wrong for hours before getting feedback, you've built strong neural pathways for the incorrect technique. Now you have to unlearn those pathways and build new ones, which is much harder than building correctly from the start. So in the early stages, seek feedback constantly. Use a teacher, a mentor, video recording, measurement tools, whatever gives you accurate information about your performance. As you advance and the fundamental patterns are established, you can reduce the frequency of feedback. You've developed better self-monitoring abilities. You can feel when something is right or wrong. But early on, front-load that feedback. Make sure you're building on a correct foundation from the very beginning. So let all of this settle into your awareness as your body grows heavy and your breathing slows. Your brain is an incredible learning machine, but it has specific mechanisms and preferences. Practice at the edge where growth happens. Make mistakes and fix them. Use short, frequent sessions spaced over time. Let yourself partially forget and then relearn. Recall actively instead of passively reviewing. Interleave and vary your practice to build flexible knowledge. Track your errors as data and get plenty of feedback early when it matters most. This is how practice actually rewires your brain. This is the science behind rapid skill development. Let your mind rest now. Let these insights become part of how you think about learning. And let yourself drift into deep, restorative sleep whenever you're ready. As you continue to relax, feeling the weight of your body sinking deeper into comfort, let's explore something that often gets overlooked. We've talked about how to practice, what to practice, and when to practice. But there's another dimension that's equally important. The container that holds your learning, your focus, your energy, and your environment. Because you can have the perfect practice strategy, but if your attention is scattered, your energy is depleted, or your environment is working against you, learning becomes unnecessarily difficult. So let's talk about how to create the conditions where deep learning can flourish. Let's begin with something that seems obvious, but is rarely done well. Remove distractions. Your brain has a limited capacity for attention. Imagine it as a spotlight that can only illuminate so much at once. When notifications ping, when your phone buzzes, when music with lyrics plays in the background, when multiple browser tabs call for your attention, that spotlight fragments. Part of it stays on your learning task, but parts of it scatter to all these other stimuli. And here's what research shows. Even if you don't consciously respond to a distraction, Even if you ignore the notification, your brain has already spent cognitive resources registering it and deciding to ignore it. That's attention leaked away from learning. The cost isn't just the moment you look at your phone. It's the constant low-level monitoring your brain does, staying alert for the next potential interruption. So before you begin a practice session, create a distraction-free zone. Turn off notifications. Put your phone in another room or in a drawer. Close unnecessary programs and tabs. Let people around you know you need uninterrupted time. This isn't about being rigid or antisocial. It's about giving your brain what it needs to enter deep focus. And in deep focus, learning accelerates exponentially. 20 minutes of truly focused practice beats 2 hours of divided attention every single time. But distraction isn't just digital. Optimize your physical environment. The space where you learn matters more than you might think. Temperature, lighting, noise levels, even the chair you're sitting in, all of these affect your ability to focus and learn effectively. Research suggests that slightly cool temperatures, around 65 to 70 degrees, are optimal for cognitive performance. Too warm, and you get drowsy. Too cold, and you're uncomfortable. Lighting should be bright enough to prevent eye strain, but not harsh. Natural light is ideal when possible because it helps regulate your circadian rhythm. Background noise is interesting. Complete silence works for some people, but makes others feel hyper-aware of every small sound. For many learners, a gentle ambient noise, like the hum of a coffee shop or white noise, can actually improve focus by masking more distracting sounds. Your physical comfort matters too. A supportive chair, good posture, ergonomic setup. When your body is uncomfortable, part of your attention is always on that discomfort. But when your physical environment supports you, it fades into the background and your mind can fully engage with learning. Take time to optimize these elements. You'll be spending hours in this space. Make it work for you rather than against you. There's also a temporal dimension to consider. Learn at your best time of day. Your brain doesn't operate at the same level of effectiveness throughout the day. You have natural peaks and valleys of alertness, focus, and cognitive capacity. These are driven by your circadian rhythm, your individual chronotype, and various hormonal fluctuations. Some people are sharpest in the early morning. Others don't hit their cognitive peak until late afternoon or evening. Pay attention to your own patterns. When do you feel most alert and focused? When does challenging mental work feel engaging rather than exhausting? That's your optimal learning window. Try to schedule your most demanding practice sessions during these peak times. Save the less cognitively demanding tasks, the review work or the routine practice, for your lower energy periods. This isn't always perfectly possible with the constraints of work and life, but even moving toward alignment helps. If you're forcing yourself to learn complex material during your natural energy trough, you're making everything harder than it needs to be. Work with your biology instead of fighting it. And within your learning sessions, structure matters. Use Pomodoro sprints. This technique, named after a tomato-shaped kitchen timer, involves working in focused intervals followed by short breaks. Typically 25 minutes of concentrated work, then a 5-minute break. After 4 cycles, take a longer break of 15 to 30 minutes. Why does this work so well? Because it matches your brain's natural attention span. Most people can maintain intense focus for about 20 to 30 minutes before mental fatigue begins creeping in. By building breaks into the structure, you're preventing that fatigue from accumulating. You're working with your brain's rhythm instead of trying to push through exhaustion. The Pomodoro technique also creates a sense of urgency. You know you only have 25 minutes, so you focus more intensely. There's no time for dawdling or distraction. And psychologically, it makes daunting tasks feel manageable. You're not committing to hours of work. You're committing to one 25-minute sprint. Anyone could do that. And then another. And another. Before you know it, you've completed a deeply productive session, but it never felt overwhelming because you took it one sprint at a time. Those breaks between sprints aren't just rest. They're strategic. Take smart breaks. Not all breaks are created equal. Scrolling social media during your break might feel relaxing, but it's actually cognitively demanding. Your brain is still processing information, still being stimulated. A smart break gives your mind genuine rest and allows the default mode network to activate. This is the network that becomes active when you're not focused on external tasks, and it's crucial for memory consolidation and creative insight. So what makes a good break? Movement. Get up, walk around, stretch. This increases blood flow and oxygen to your brain. Looking at something distant, ideally out a window, gives your muscles a rest and can reduce mental fatigue. Hydration. Drink some water. Even mild dehydration impairs cognitive function. Mindless activities that don't require much thought. Washing dishes, watering plants, simple tasks that let your mind wander. What you're avoiding is more stimulation, more information processing. Your brain has been working hard. Give it genuine downtime. Those few minutes of real rest make the next sprint dramatically more effective. Here's another way to structure your practice intelligently. Alternate hard and easy tasks. You have a limited reservoir of mental energy, often called willpower or cognitive resources. Demanding tasks drain this reservoir. If you try to do difficult work for hours on end, you'll hit a wall where everything feels impossible and your performance craters. But if you alternate, spending time on a challenging task and then switching to something easier, you give parts of your brain a chance to recover while still remaining productive. For example, if you're learning a language, you might do intense grammar exercises for 30 minutes, then switch to lighter vocabulary review or listening practice. Both are valuable, but one is cognitively demanding and the other is more relaxed. Or if you're learning to code, you might work on a difficult algorithm problem, then switch to refactoring easier code or reading documentation. You're still learning, still practicing, but you're managing your cognitive load. This approach lets you sustain productive practice for much longer than if you were constantly operating at maximum difficulty. And it keeps learning from feeling like a relentless grind. There's rhythm, variation, breathing room. Now let's talk about something that affects everything else. Protect your sleep. Sleep isn't just rest. It's when your brain does some of its most important learning work. During sleep, particularly during deep sleep and REM sleep, your brain consolidates memories. It replays the neural patterns you practice during the day, strengthening them, integrating them with existing knowledge, and pruning away what's not important. Studies show that people who sleep well after learning perform significantly better than those who stay awake or sleep poorly, even if the total time spent practicing is the same. Sleep deprivation also impairs your ability to learn new information the next day. Your hippocampus, the brain region crucial for forming new memories, doesn't function properly when you're sleep deprived. So if you're sacrificing sleep to get more practice time, you're actually undermining your learning. You'd make more progress with 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep and less practice time than you would with more practice and inadequate sleep. Prioritize sleep like you prioritize practice. It's not optional. It's part of the learning process itself. And here's something that might surprise you. Move your body to boost learning. Physical movement isn't just good for your body. It's good for your brain. Exercise increases blood flow to the brain, which delivers more oxygen and nutrients. It triggers the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the growth and survival of neurons. It improves mood and reduces stress, both of which enhance learning capacity. You don't need intense workouts, although those certainly help. Even light movement makes a difference. A 20-minute walk before a study session can improve focus and memory. Standing and stretching between practice sprints keeps your brain alert. Some people find they learn better while moving, pacing as they review material, or doing balance exercises while practicing recall. The mind and body aren't separate. They're interconnected systems. When you take care of your body, when you keep it moving and active, your brain works better. Learning becomes easier. So don't spend all day sitting still. Build movement into your learning routine. Your brain will thank you. Now here's an interesting twist. Vary where you practice. There's a common belief that you should always study in the same place to build associations and habits. And while consistency has value, research shows that varying your learning environment can actually strengthen memory. When you learn something in multiple different locations, your brain encodes the information less attached to any specific context. The knowledge becomes more flexible, more transferable. If you always practice in your bedroom, your brain might link that learning to the bedroom environment. But if you practice in your bedroom, then at a library, then at a coffee shop, your brain recognizes that this knowledge needs to be accessible anywhere, not just in one specific place. So mix it up occasionally. Change rooms. Go outside. Find different spaces. This variation also keeps learning from feeling monotonous. A new environment can bring fresh energy and perspective. Just make sure your different locations still meet your needs for focus and minimal distraction. The goal is beneficial variety, not chaos. And speaking of variety, here's one more way to keep your brain engaged. Add novelty to your sessions. Your brain is attracted to novelty. New and unexpected stimuli trigger dopamine release, which enhances attention and memory formation. When every practice session follows exactly the same routine, becomes completely predictable, your brain starts operating on autopilot. But when you introduce small elements of novelty, new exercises, different approaches, unexpected challenges, your brain perks up. It pays closer attention. This doesn't mean constantly reinventing your entire practice routine. The core structure can remain consistent, but add small variations. Try a new type of practice drill. Approach a familiar problem from a different angle. Use a new tool or resource. Listen to different ambient music. These little changes keep your brain alert and engaged rather than sliding into mechanical repetition. Learning requires attention, and novelty captures attention. Use this to your advantage. Keep things fresh enough that your brain stays interested. So let these principles settle into your awareness as you drift deeper into relaxation. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within the container of your focus, your energy, and your environment. Remove what distracts. Optimize your space. Practice when your energy is highest. Use structured sprints with smart breaks. Alternate difficulty levels. Protect your sleep. Keep your body moving. Vary your location. And add touches of novelty. These aren't luxuries. They're necessities. They're how you protect the deep focus that makes real learning possible. Let your breathing slow. Let your muscles release. And let yourself drift into peaceful sleep, knowing you understand how to create the perfect conditions for learning. As we come to the final part of our journey tonight, as your body has become completely relaxed and your mind is open and peaceful, let's talk about something crucial. Everything we've discussed, all the techniques and principles and strategies, they only matter if you actually do them. And this is where most people struggle. Not with understanding how to learn, but with maintaining the consistency to actually follow through. So let's explore how to build motivation that lasts, create habits that stick, and generate momentum that carries you forward even when enthusiasm fades. Because learning isn't just about technique. It's about showing up again and again until competence becomes second nature. Let's start with one of the most powerful habit-building strategies available. Stack learning onto existing habits. Your life already has structure. Things you do every day without thinking. You make coffee in the morning. You eat lunch. You brush your teeth before bed. These existing habits are anchors, stable points in your day that happen automatically, and you can use them as triggers for new learning habits. The concept is simple. After I do this thing I already do, I will practice for a few minutes. After I pour my morning coffee, I will review vocabulary for 5 minutes while it cools. After I eat lunch, I will practice scales on my instrument. After I brush my teeth at night, I will do a quick mental review of what I learned today. By linking your new learning practice to an established habit, you're borrowing the automaticity of the existing behavior. You don't have to remember to practice. You don't have to find motivation. The existing habit cues the new behavior. And over time, the connection strengthens until the learning practice becomes just as automatic as the habit it's attached to. This is habit stacking, and it's remarkably effective for building consistency. And when you're building these habits, start smaller than you think necessary. Set tiny minimum daily practice. Most people set ambitious goals. I'll practice for an hour every day. And when life gets busy or motivation dips, they miss the goal, feel guilty, and the whole system falls apart. But here's a different approach. Set a minimum that's so small it feels almost trivial. 5 minutes. 2 exercises. 1 page. Something you can absolutely do even on your worst, busiest, most exhausted day. The goal isn't to only do the minimum. On good days, you'll naturally do more. But on hard days, you can still hit your minimum and maintain the streak. And maintaining the streak matters enormously for building identity and momentum. When you practice every single day, even if some days are just the bare minimum, you begin to see yourself as someone who practices daily. That identity shift is powerful. You're not someone trying to learn. You're someone who does learn consistently, as part of who you are. The minimum protects the streak, and the streak builds the identity. But even with good habits, life throws unexpected challenges at you. Use if-then implementation plans. These are pre-made decisions about what you will do in specific situations. If this obstacle appears, then I will respond this way. For example, if I have an unusually busy day, then I will do my 5-minute minimum practice before breakfast. If I'm traveling, then I will practice in my hotel room before bed. If I'm feeling unmotivated, then I will set a timer for just 10 minutes and start anyway. The power of implementation plans is that they remove the need for willpower and decision-making in the moment. When you're tired or stressed or busy, your brain doesn't have to figure out what to do. The decision has already been made. You're just executing the plan. Research shows that people who create implementation plans are significantly more likely to follow through on goals than those who rely on general motivation. It's the difference between hoping you'll find time to practice and knowing exactly when and how you'll practice regardless of circumstances. And as you practice consistently, pay attention to something crucial. Track progress and small wins. Progress feels good. It releases dopamine, which reinforces behavior and builds motivation for the next session. But progress in skill development is often subtle, especially day to day. If you don't track it, you might not notice it. And if you don't notice it, you miss out on that motivational boost. So create a simple tracking system. It could be a calendar where you mark each day you practice. It could be a journal where you note what you worked on and any breakthroughs, no matter how small. It could be recording yourself periodically to compare against earlier versions. The format doesn't matter. What matters is that you're making progress visible to yourself. And pay special attention to small wins. You held a note longer than before. You saw the problem type you couldn't do last week. You had a conversation in your target language, even briefly. These aren't final mastery, but they're evidence of movement in the right direction. Celebrate them. Acknowledge them. They're proof that your practice is working, that you're growing, that the investment is paying off. And speaking of making growth visible, here's a simple but powerful practice. Reflect for 2 minutes after practice. When you finish a practice session, don't just close your materials and move on with your day. Take 2 minutes to reflect. What went well today? What was challenging? What did you learn? What will you focus on next time? This brief reflection serves multiple purposes. It helps consolidate what you just practiced by actively recalling and thinking about it. It makes learning visible, turning abstract effort into concrete awareness. It helps you plan and adjust your approach strategically rather than just repeating the same routine. And it creates a sense of completion, a psychological endpoint that makes the practice session feel satisfying rather than just stopping when you run out of time. 2 minutes. That's all it takes. But those 2 minutes transform practice from something you do into something you learn from and improve through. Now here's a technique that might seem paradoxical. Use time pressure intentionally. Deadlines create urgency, and urgency focuses attention. Without time pressure, it's easy to let learning drift indefinitely. You'll practice whenever you feel like it. You'll get to it eventually. But when you set a specific deadline, a date by which you'll demonstrate your skill or reach a milestone, everything sharpens. You have to prioritize. You have to make choices about what's most important. You practice more consistently because the deadline is approaching. Now, the deadline doesn't have to be external. You can create your own. I will perform this piece for friends 3 weeks from today. I will have a conversation entirely in my target language 1 month from now. I will build and present this project by the end of next month. The deadline should be challenging but achievable. Too easy, and it doesn't create useful pressure. Too hard, and it becomes demoralizing. But right in that sweet spot, time pressure becomes a powerful motivator. It transforms abstract learning into a concrete game with real stakes. And speaking of games, here's an approach that can make practice dramatically more engaging. Turn learning into a game. Games are motivating because they have clear goals, immediate feedback, escalating challenges, and often a sense of achievement or competition. You can bring these elements into learning. Create point systems for completing practice tasks. Set challenges or quests for yourself. Use apps or systems that gamify progress with levels and achievements. Compete with yourself to beat yesterday's performance. Or, if you're comfortable with it, compete with others who are learning the same skill. The specific mechanics don't matter as much as the shift in mindset. Instead of learning feeling like work or obligation, it becomes a game you're playing. And games are inherently engaging. We play them willingly, even eagerly. We persist through difficulty because we want to win, to level up, to see what comes next. When you gamify learning, you're tapping into these intrinsic motivators. Practice becomes something you look forward to rather than something you have to push yourself to do. There's another psychological element you can leverage. Add curiosity and mystery. Curiosity is a powerful motivator. When you're curious about something, you naturally seek it out. You want to know the answer. You want to see what happens next. So structure your learning to cultivate curiosity. Leave questions unanswered at the end of a session that you'll explore next time. Introduce mystery by learning about something intriguing before fully understanding how it works. Set up problems or challenges that make you wonder about the solution. Consume content related to your skill that sparks questions. Why does that technique work? How did they achieve that result? What would happen if I tried this differently? Curiosity creates a pull toward learning rather than having to push yourself. You're not forcing yourself to practice. You're drawn to practice because you want to know, you want to discover, you want to solve the puzzle. And when learning is driven by curiosity, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like exploration. But you don't have to do this alone. Join groups, buddies, or masterminds. Social connection is one of the most underutilized tools for maintaining learning consistency. When you're learning in isolation, it's easy to quit. No one knows. No one is affected. But when you're part of a group, when you have a learning partner, when you're accountable to others, everything changes. You show up because others are expecting you. You practice because you'll be sharing progress. You push through difficult moments because you don't want to let your partner or group down. And beyond accountability, groups provide other benefits. You learn from others' experiences and insights. You get encouragement when you're struggling. You celebrate wins together, which amplifies motivation. You're reminded that challenges are normal because everyone is facing them. Find a learning community, online or in person. Find one accountability partner who's learning the same skill or a different one. Join a mastermind where people support each other's growth. The specific structure matters less than the social connection. Humans are social creatures. We're wired to care about our standing in groups. Use that wiring to support your learning journey. And in our modern world, there's one more resource you can leverage. Use AI as an on-demand coach. Artificial intelligence has reached a point where it can provide personalized guidance, answer questions, explain concepts, suggest practice strategies, and give feedback on your work, all available instantly whenever you need it. You don't have to wait for office hours or schedule appointments. You don't have to wonder if your question is too basic to ask. You can interact with AI to clarify confusion, generate practice problems, get explanations at your level of understanding, or even role-play scenarios to practice skills. It's like having a patient tutor available 24 hours a day. Now, AI isn't perfect. It works best as a supplement to other resources, not a complete replacement. But as a tool for maintaining momentum, answering questions in the moment, and providing personalized support, it's remarkably valuable. When you hit a confusing point late at night and would normally have to stop and wait until you could ask someone, you can work through it immediately with AI assistance. When you want to practice a skill but don't have a partner, AI can play that role. This technology removes barriers that would have stopped previous generations of learners. Take advantage of it. So as we come to the end of our time together tonight, as your breathing has become slow and deep, as sleep draws nearer, let these final principles settle into your mind. You can actually do this. Learning doesn't require superhuman willpower or perfect conditions. It requires smart systems. Stack learning onto habits you already have. Set minimums so small you can always maintain your streak. Plan for obstacles in advance. Track your progress so you can see you're growing. Reflect briefly to consolidate learning. Use time pressure to create focus. Turn practice into a game. Cultivate curiosity. Connect with others. And use modern tools like AI to support your journey. The techniques matter. The science matters. But what matters most is this. You show up. Again and again. Even when it's hard. Even when progress feels slow. Even when motivation fades. You show up because you've built systems that make showing up easier. You've removed obstacles. You've created support. You've made learning feel possible, approachable, even enjoyable. And that's the real secret. Learning quickly isn't about finding some magical technique. It's about creating an approach that works with your brain, your life, and your humanity. It's about being strategic and consistent and kind to yourself when things don't go perfectly. You have everything you need: the knowledge, the strategies, the understanding of how learning actually works. And now, as you drift into sleep, your brain will continue processing these ideas, strengthening these neural pathways, preparing you for the learning journey ahead. Sleep well, learn well, and trust that with the right approach, you can learn anything you decide to master. Good night.